What's up, guys? Today we're going to be taking a look at a very special guitar. It is a Gibson Murphy Lab Jerry Cantrell Signature. This is a brand new model that just came out. It is extremely limited and we are so lucky to be looking at it. We are joined by the owner, Mike.
Hello.
Special thank you to Mike for providing this guitar, bringing some vintage guitars to compare it to, some great amps here in the background. Thank you so much, Mike. It's very, very kind of you to do that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Please
check out his Instagram and YouTube. They will be linked in the description below. His YouTube channel will actually have him playing Alice in Chains covers. With this guitar, this video will not have any covers. It'll just be kind of playing the guitar in isolation, so check him out for that. Great, so let's get into it, Mike. First and foremost, how did you end up with this guitar and what are we looking at?
Sure. So this is the 2021 Gibson Jerry Cantrell Signature Les Paul Custom, the Wino, so the reference to the wine red finish. Yeah. This is the aged and signed, so it's Murphy Lab aged and signed on the back. So you'll see that on the back of the headstock. There we go. And yeah, there's only 100 of these made for the world and only 30 in the US. So
wow. That's wild.
Yeah, so not too many of these around, despite what's on Reverb right now or whatever, right? So not too many around. But so this is a good one. This is number 81, and I got this from Dave's in Wisconsin. It's actually pretty hard to track one of these down if you're familiar with some of these limited artist runs that Gibson's been doing, whether it's Adam Jones or Jerry Cantrell, or there's some rumors about like the Greenie Les Paul that Kirk Hammett is using, right? And that sort of thing. So if you're familiar with these things, they're actually pretty hard to get. You have to like pre-order them. You've got to put like a lot of money down first. Sometimes you even have to pay the whole sum at first. So they're kind of a little bit hard to get a hold of. I called a couple of shops, but ultimately I got one at Dave's. When I called them, it was actually kind of funny. I called them and said, like, I had bought a guitar from them in the past, so I kind of knew them. And I said, hey, there's this Jerry Cantrell thing. I heard some whispers on the internet about it. Is this a thing that's occurring? And they said, yeah, it is, but it's not like a custom shop model, I don't think. I think it's a production model. And I was like, oh, okay, well, they said, we'll investigate it. And I said, okay, cool. I didn't really know if I would hear from them again, but they did. They called me back. So they called me back a couple of days later and they said, oh, yeah. It is going to be a custom shop, and they told me the price, and they said, we have one that we are getting, and if you want it, I need 20% down right now. And I was like, okay, here's my credit card. And so, like, that was it. So that's kind of how I got it. I mean, by comparison, other shops were sold out, right? Like Sweetwater was sold out, Wildwood was sold out, right? All the big dealers were already all gone. So, maybe I got one of the last ones in the US. I don't know. But the funny part is, despite maybe being a little, late to the party for actually placing the order, although I did get one, this is, as far as I can determine, this is I'm the first person ever to receive this guitar.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting it until next year, because when I had called Sweetwater, they had told me that it was not going to ship until February or March of 2022.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, that was my expectation. And then Dave's called me in August and said, yeah,
here's your guitar.
Your guitar's here. I didn't know anything about it, right? I didn't know any of the specs. I didn't know. I mean, yeah, I know, you're thinking like you ordered this guitar without knowing any of the specs, but I hate to say it, like if you want one of these collector's ones, that's what you got to do. Like that's the world we live in today.
So let's reiterate that point. You bought this guitar having no idea what it was going to look like, what the specs were.
No.
And Dave's calls you up and says, hey, we got your guitar. Do you want it? You're like, yes.
Yep.
And so they ship it to you and it shows up. And you texted me and you're like, hey, I got this guitar. And I'm like, that guitar doesn't even exist on the internet. Like I looked it up. I couldn't even find any information. There's no spec sheets about it. Nothing. It had not been released by Gibson.
Yeah.
It just, you had it.
Correct. Yeah.
Which is incredible.
Yeah.
And so you open the case. You have no idea what's going to be inside. You lift up the case. First impressions, what were they?
I mean, my first impressions were I thought it was pretty great. I mean, I opened the case. I didn't know what to expect. I guess kind of first thing I noticed obviously was the finish, right? It's a great wine red finish. It's actually a little bit of a lighter wine red hue than my other wine red custom from 82. Now, I don't know if that's because of age, right? I'm not sure. But this one's a little darker. I'm not sure if you can tell it on the camera or not. But if you're in the room, you would be able to tell that they are a bit different. So the first was I was like, oh, I kind of like the lighter wine red look. Second thing I really noticed was the bridge pickup and kind of what's going on with the pickups, because that uncovered pickup kind of, stands out a little bit. So, and I'm a bridge pickup kind of guy, right? Hard rock player. through Marshalls and Friedmans and Mesas.
The amps don't give it away.
Right, exactly, whatever. So, I'm concerned about that, right? So I was like, all right, cool. And, I loved what they had done with it, cover off. They had aged the pickup. They even aged like some of the bobbin wrapping and stuff here, which I thought, the attention to detail was very cool. They even changed the pickup height screws in the guitar to what I assume matches Jerry's, actual guitar. So, my first impression was, hey, I love that. That's really cool. And then I checked out some of the aging, and I thought the aging was done very well. The checking in the lacquer is done very well. It doesn't have any of those issues that were reported with the Murphy Lab guitars that had some flaking of the finish. There's none of that on this guitar. I even, in an attempt to see if it would flake, kind of like on the back here, there's like a little bit, I even kind of just like picked at it a little bit to see, if anything would happen, and nothing happened. So I was very pleased about that. And I think just generally the aging job they did is very good. They got great checking here, great checking on the back. Even the details, and you guys will see this, I think, in the stuff that you're going to show in the video, the B-roll, but it's got great checking like along the binding. They even got some of the attention to detail. I mean, as this is stupid, but one of the first things I noticed was that even the binding has yellow and white sections on it, which if you have an older Les Paul, that is what happens to them. So I thought it was very authentic, the chips in it were done very well. I thought like basically the overall aging was pretty close to what comes from like the Fender custom shop. So I think they've done a very, very good job. So my initial impression was beautiful guitar. It looks great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So great. We're going to get into all of that in way more detail and show close-ups. Check the timestamps for the description. Dyslexia there. Check the description for timestamps to jump ahead to the sections if you're curious. But we're going to go into the tone because obviously a guitar, that's a huge factor, right?
Yep.
So before we get into that in the comparisons, what pickups are in this guitar?
So we've got a 498T uncovered here and a 490R here.
Okay. And so those are, pickups that might be a little, confusing. Is that like, that's an odd choice, I guess? For some.
Yeah, I think maybe a little bit of a pedestrian kind of choice, some might say. But I think kind of two things. Number one, my understanding is Jerry's original Les Paul that this is, basically copying, has those still original pickups in it. And number two, yeah, I think some people might have said, he's been known to use a Seymour Duncan JB, like where is that? Or some of his newer stuff is done with like a Motor City black belt, second degree black belt pickup, which is like a boutique pickup builder in Detroit. So I think some people kind of expected that. I guess maybe even personally, I, not knowing any of the specs, expected that might be what came in it. But yeah. It's just the 498T and the 490R, which, like I said, seems like a little bit of a pedestrian choice, but you guys will check out the tones in a minute. I think they actually sound pretty great.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and take a listen to it. So again, we're going to be comparing this guitar to these two vintage Les Paul Customs through a variety of amps. So let's listen to them, and then we'll come back and kind of talk about what we heard.
Sounds
good. All right, let's listen. right, Mike. I thought that was incredibly interesting. I'll be honest, I did not have very high expectations for this guitar just based off the pickups. You know, like I said, I've had a guitar with these pickups before, and it didn't sound that great. But this guitar, honestly, I thought it sounded fantastic. It has its own sound to it. It's, you know, maybe not necessarily something I would naturally gravitate towards, but I think especially through these amps you brought here, it sounded killer. I mean, if you were to tell me that this had a special, you know, unique set of pickups that were bespoke to Jerry Cantrell, but yeah,
Would have
totally.
believed that. Yeah,
This
totally.
is-
Yeah, absolutely.
This is some special set of boutique pickups or whatever.
Yeah.
It did not sound like your average Joe, you know, 498 and 490 sets.
Yeah.
So it was also incredibly interesting hearing them side by side. So let's go over kind of our thoughts of this guitar as well as just some additional context of how it sounded compared to these two guitars. So I guess we'll start really quick with probably the biggest difference we heard overall, which was through the Friedman amp.
Yep.
And honestly, it was pretty surprising. Obviously, this guitar is lower output, but this guitar was at least 2.5, 3 dB quieter than the other two guitars through that Friedman amp. It just was much lower output, pushed the amp a lot less, and was just a lot quieter, which was interesting. And so I actually did raise the levels of this guitar in the video and the excerpts you heard, just for that amp, because it was so much quieter that it was hard to listen to. You couldn't really hear the real tone of the guitar. But overall, I thought the Friedman amp really showed the differences between the guitars the most. So this guitar, to me, just has a massive sound. It's got a ton of low end. It's got a lot of clarity, a lot more clarity than I was expecting based off of, you know, the pickup set in it.
Yeah.
It sounded very clear. It had top end, had low end, it had mids. It was just a powerful set of pickups in this guitar. It just sounded massive, like I said, huge. This guitar had a very interesting tone, very different from this guitar. To me, it had a less low end for sure. I would call it more focused. So it had a good amount of high end clarity for sure, but it didn't have a huge low end, and it was just kind of cut really well. I felt like
A lot of cut.
Yeah,
A lot of cut on this guitar.
this guitar, on the other hand, so this has the Tim Shaw PAFs in it,
Yep.
and so and the output readings are kind of standard PAF. And this guitar was all mids. I felt like a ton of mids.
Yeah. Much softer in the lows and the highs, right?
Yeah.
Much more mid focused. I personally, I mean, I brought it because it's another wine red Les Paul custom that we could compare it to. But I actually, at home, like, I actually don't think these 3 amps actually suit that guitar better. I think, like, for example, like some of the Marshalls, like the AFD 100 actually suit that better.
Yeah.
Or the Twin Sister, the Friedman Twin Sister actually suit that better because they have more highs and lows that kind of make up for the highs and lows that guitar lacks.
Yes.
Right. So it was interesting to hear it in this mix, but you could definitely hear a difference between that one and these two.
Yeah, for sure. And like always, whenever you're doing these sort of things, you can always, cater the amp to one specific guitar and make every guitar sound better, and set it up perfectly for that, specific instrument. But this is more just to give context,
right,
so people can kind of hear the differences between these types of guitars. So, I thought it was incredibly interesting. What were your kind of takeaways other than the Friedman? We played through this amazing Mesa amp over here that just sounded awesome. This Marshall, I've never heard of this Marshall before. It was very cool. And then obviously the Suhr PT15 as well, which I've featured on the channel a lot. So what were some of your takeaways?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think as far as the Friedman, just really quickly, I think it was great. I think, like, with that, this is not a plug for Friedman, but, like, I think, like, seeing the different guitars and the way that the amp responded to the guitars is exactly what you would expect from, like, a world-class,
it's a good point,
professional level amp, right? I mean, every guitar sounds different through it. The response is totally different, and that's kind of what you would expect.
Yeah.
Through the Marshall, which was the vintage modern, check those out if you want. We could do a whole nother video on those. They're a very unusual Marshall, but they have a really cult-like following. And people kind of call them maybe the best, like, $700 or $800 you can spend on a Marshall. So check them out. But I thought actually they showed the least amount of difference between these 3 guitars. I think this one had a little more gain through that guy. But, you know, overall it was the most similar. The Mesa, on the other hand, was more like the Friedman. It was a little more responsive, I think. But it still is a very aggressive preamp driven amp, right? And so I think the combination of the Mesa and the Wino, I mean, man, it was, you understand why Jerry Cantrell transitioned away from his Bogner modded Marshalls and started using a Mesa somewhere in the Dirt era, right? Because the sound is just massive, right? I mean, it's massive. And this is an old 92 Revision F dual rectifier, and it just sounds huge with that guitar. I mean, it sounds killer.
Yeah, I would say this guitar and that amp are a match made in heaven. You could totally see that, you know, these were meant to go together. The tone definitely fit it perfectly, I thought. This just had such a huge low end to it with the Mesa. It sound, when you're doing the lower riffs, it was like, oh yeah, I've heard that sound before. Like,
right.
Immediately recognizable.
Yeah, when you want that sound, like this guitar into the Mesa is that sound, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I thought that was great. And the other guitars, again, they sounded good, just different. It was different. So let's, I guess, talk about really quick what I did with the Suhr PT15. And I rolled off the volume just to kind of, I was curious to see how they would behave when you rolled off the volume and you got a lot of gain going on. And this guitar, I thought, performed really well.
Yeah.
It cleaned up really fantastically, and then it also retained the high end, which was great. And I was very impressed with this. It actually reminded me a lot of the behavior I saw on the other Murphy Lab I had checked out. I know Gibson has talked about, you know, upgrading the pots and all that sort of thing, and I think this guitar really was great in that regard. It did really well. These two guitars were very interesting. This has had some wiring done to it, so it doesn't have the stock wiring anymore.
correct. Stock pickups, but not the stock, and stock knobs, but not the stock wiring. And this actually has been put in 50s wiring.
Yeah. And so I thought that one did okay. Definitely rolled off the volume, retained some high end, but not to the same degree as this.
Right.
This guitar, on the other hand, was like, nah. You rolled it off, and it barely rolled off.
And that's the original electronics in that one, by the way. Yeah, all original. So
it was interesting. I mean, again, this isn't about necessarily these three guitars, but it was just kind of interesting to hear some of the differences and to give context of how well this guitar performs when you roll it off. You know, it's got a hotter pickup, but you can roll off the volume to kind of clean it up a little bit, and it performed really well overall.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the things that I want to say too, just about the three guitars really quickly, is just the playability. I know we just talked about tone, but the playability between these three guitars is very different. Because, you know, obviously this is one right off the production line, right? Frets are great. This one is the exact opposite, original frets, but these are fretless Wonder frets that are worn down to their last level and crowns. This one's a little harder to play in some circumstances. I think
a lot harder,
especially clean. This one is a lot harder to play. And then that one's kind of like sort of in the middle, original frets, but they have more life left on them. So some of the stuff you may hear or see or whatever is also probably related to the fact that, you know, I've never been in a situation where I've played three guitars so rapidly. And when you play them so rapidly, you feel the difference more than you hear the difference. I mean, you hear it, but you really feel it in your hands. Like going from this one to this one was like, wow, this is a lot harder to play. Yeah. Right. So
yeah, we'll definitely get into that a little bit more, the playability, because that's I think a plus of a guitar like this.
Yeah.
But to just kind of round off the tone overall, this guitar really impressed me, the tone of it. It's got this massive sound to it, but it still has a lot of clarity. I would call this a bright guitar.
Yeah.
Which is not something I expected to say.
No, not with Jerry Cantrell. You're not thinking bright, right? You're thinking a dark sound.
And Jerry, in the Gibson video, described his Wino Les Paul as being
the fattest, I think, and darkest one he had.
Yeah, I think he said it was more rounded off than his other two customs that he uses. And this guitar, I don't think, fits that description very well, which is actually a bonus to me personally. I think this guitar, it has, like, the neck pickup was totally usable. It had a lot of clarity to it, actually. While still, you could still get the liquid lead tones, I think, but it still had clarity to it. The middle was very chimey, I thought.
Yeah.
And the bridge, again, you have tons of low end, but it also had a lot of top end too. And so this guitar sounded, especially through something like the Mesa, it sounded modern, but in a good way. It didn't sound like anemic. It didn't sound thin. It sounded massive. It didn't sound vintage, but I think for what this guitar is going for, I think it fit the bill perfectly, personally. Now, you know, if you watch this channel before, you know that I generally don't play these kind of amps or these kind of riffs. Definitely not, you know, my forte per se. But I really enjoyed it. I had a great time, and it was very cool to check out these amps. Obviously, this is more your world. So would you agree with what I said about that? Or
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, yeah, this guitar surprised me. I would say it has a lot of bite, right? Especially on the bridge pickup. It's got a lot of bite, right? So I was very surprised. Now, I mean, the only thing I can think of is, you know, in regards to what Jerry said, is that some older Les Pauls are brighter. In my experience, older Les Pauls are generally a little bit brighter than newer Les Pauls. So like maybe something like this, or you know, I've owned ones from the 90s before that are a little brighter. So maybe this is a darker one to him. I don't know. But I agree with you that I thought it was going to be like big, thick, hot, fat. And it, you know, it is hot and does have a big sound, but it's got a lot of bite. Yeah. So, you know, when you're doing, you know, when you're playing like, you know, Man in the Box, or, you know, you're playing Them Bones and you're doing like that little like high part there, it really cuts through. I mean, it's got a lot of cut.
Totally.
Yeah.
So overall, I think the tone was great on this guitar. I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about these three. So go ahead and comment below. Let us know. We're very interested to hear what you guys have to say. Obviously, there is no right and wrong with tone. It's all super subjective. And like we said, we could, of course, set amps up differently to favor one guitar over the other. That's not what this was about. I'm sure we will actually do more videos on some of like this guitar here, and probably other guitars of yours in the future, where we can focus more specifically on one guitar.
Right.
But we just want to give some context for you guys, and
just show you some cool stuff.
If I've got the opportunity to show you some vintage guitars, I'm gonna do it.
Right.
Sorry, that's just the way it is. Great. So that's tones. Let's go ahead and put these guys down. So now I want to just kind of transition a little bit and quickly talk about Murphy Lab, and then we'll go over the good, bad, and the in-between, kind of the review section of this video. But I want to talk about Murphy Lab mainly because I have some experience with Murphy Lab. Obviously, I have another video I did where I reviewed a heavy age RO, link in the description, up in the corner, all that stuff. And I was very interested to see how this guitar would compare to that. I know you were interested too, because you read a lot of stuff online, and there's a lot of stuff going around about Murphy Labs. And so it was, intriguing to both of us. So I just want to kind of tell you guys, since I've handled both, what my impressions were. And I will say, as soon as he handed it to me, I was like, oh, okay, this is not the same as the other Murphy Lab. It did not feel the same to me. When I was handed the Heavy Age RO by Daniel, immediately my reaction was like, this is completely different. Wow, I can immediately notice the lacquer is different on this. This feels different. I'm going to be clear. This feels different than my made-to-measure Les Paul, my other modern Les Pauls here. The lacquer feels different, but it doesn't feel different as much. So I would say that this lands in between. So you have the Heavy Age RO, the older Murphy Lab stuff. That lacquer felt quite a bit different. This feels kind of in between those two, and I think it's kind of the sweet spot personally. We'll go over the aging and all of that here in a second, but just overall the lacquer feels different. So we don't have confirmation from Gibson that they have changed the lacquer, that they have done anything. There's rumors flying around.
If anything, they had a bizarre statement where they kind of blamed dealers.
Don't get me started on that.
That was a little odd.
Don't get me started on that. Yeah. We won't go down that rabbit hole.
For the record, I did not follow their instructions. I got this guitar and immediately opened it like a jerk because I just was willing to take the chance. And guess what?
Well, also,
nothing happened.
It's summer, to be fair.
It is summer, but nothing happened. So nothing happened.
Yeah. So all that to say that the guitar feels different, but this is very anecdotal because we don't know. Gibson has not said anything. But now let's kind of transition over to the actual aging on the guitar. This, again, looks different than the first Murphy Lab I played. And all of the photos I've seen of Murphy Labs look different than this. So I don't know if this was kind of part of a first run of a change, or if this is just a unicorn, that came out there. To be honest, I haven't seen pictures of other Jerry Cantrell's, the aging yet, to really get a good look. Have you?
I've just seen a couple of photos on forums, but it's sort of like, hey, it's here, it's in the case. I haven't seen any like close-ups, so I don't.
So if you own a Jerry Cantrell signature, please comment below after you kind of see the B-roll close-ups, and let us know if yours looks similar or not, because we'd be super interested to hear,
Yeah.
and I'm sure other people would be as well. But just looking at the guitar, the checking is primarily vertical on the top, which is very interesting to me because the heavy-aged RO I checked out had what I would call spiderweb checking in a lot of places, especially kind of in this area, where it was really close, sporadic checking that went every direction. Whereas this is almost entirely vertical with kind of some curves to it, which is kind of exactly what you see on most vintage Les Pauls or Gibsons for that matter. So that's a very positive kind of first impression of it. And just kind of looking at the guitar all around, you know, up in this area, which was kind of the problem area for the Murphy Lab, this does not have that sort of checking. Again, it's almost all vertical, or you can call it horizontal, whatever.
Yeah.
Somebody in my other video is like, that's not vertical, it's horizontal. Okay, whatever.
We should say up and down or back and forth. I don't
you
know.
can see the direction here. So this does not feel like that at all. It is not lifting up at all. You could immediately see on the other Murphy Lab that it was lifting up. This does not display that at all. I'll show close-ups of that. You can't really feel it with your fingernails. This feels like legitimate checking. It looks like legitimate checking. And that continues all the way to the back of the guitar. It does have a little bit more sporadic checking on the back, but it, again, looks like what I've seen on vintage guitars. It is not spider-webbed. The checking is pretty, spread apart. It's pretty wide. I think it's different than the earlier Murphy Lab guitars. Now, I can't confirm this. I don't know exactly if they had changed just the formula where they updated it, or maybe they had changed the methodology.
The process, yeah.
Maybe, we don't know. You had mentioned, you texted me, and you're like, hey, Tanner, I think that they're razor blade checking this like yours, because I have a made to measure that has the razor blade checking on it. It's a made to measure from 2018, excuse me. And to me, it kind of has that appearance, but I don't think it is that. We don't know. But it looks like maybe they get it started with that and then kind of let the...
I think that's a good hypothesis. Yeah, you came up with that idea where you said, I wonder if there's the situation they're doing now is they're doing some razor blade checking and then maybe some temperature exposure to kind of like build off of that razor blade checking instead of just straight flashing it, right, in hot, cold. I don't know. It's just all black boxed, right? So we don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, but all that to say, from, my, just anecdotal experiences of handling the Murphy Lab Heavy Edge RO to this, they're different. That was an early Murphy Lab guitar. Now, looking at some photos of, for example, the limited Carina Flying V and Explorer guitars that came out, those look like the Murphy Lab aging of old.
Yeah.
I guess that's how I'll classify it.
Yeah.
They looked just like the aging that was on the Heavy Edge RO, to where there's a lot of spider web checking on it, wasn't, kind of wide, and those had a lot more checking on it. This is pretty sparse overall. It does not have a ton of checking. I would even say that this is less checking than what I've seen on ultralight Murphy Lab aged guitars. This is like ultra light, it's the extra light. I like this a lot. I think they knocked it out of the park. If I were to order a, aged Les Paul, I would want this. Whatever they did on this, that's what I would ask for personally. It looks great. It feels great. I see no signs of it lifting up. I don't see any of that. So whatever Gibson did to fix it, it seems like it's been fixed, at least in this case with this one guitar. Please chime in if you've got a Murphy Lab that's kind of newer. We'd love to hear more about it, but that's just I just wanted to give that high level look at it. I know a lot of people have been asking me and reaching out to you to ask me, what do I think, since I have that experience with both. And I will say that this appears different. So that's great. Now we can kind of transition to actually the review section of this video where we review the guitar. What I like to do is kind of go over the good, the bad, and the in-between. And so we'll kind of give our honest impressions. Now, just to be clear, we're not being paid by anybody. You paid.
I wish, yeah.
Yeah, you paid for this guitar, out of your own pocket, 100%. And I'm just a friend who happens to be lucky enough to check out the guitar. And you guys, by extension, are able to check it out in this video. So we're going to be totally honest with you guys and go over all of it. But we're going to start off with the good, because I think there's a lot of good on this guitar.
I think so too.
And we covered a lot of it already with the tone. I think this guitar's tone is great.
Yeah.
It's not a, a 59 Les Paul tone.
No.
That's not what it's going for, and
No.
that's not what it sounds like.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Yeah, I don't think that's who they're marketing to with
No.
this guitar. But yes. Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So I think they knocked it out of the park for what it's going for. Paired with the right amp, it is killer. Like, it's addicting, to be honest. Like, I see why people like to play this sort of thing, because it's just so fun to play. So they did a great job on that.
I think true. I think same. I think, like, if I had to sum it up, like, the good in one thing, I would say, hey, it's a top tier Les Paul.
Yeah.
I mean, I've owned and played a lot of Les Pauls. This is some great, some terrible, some in between. This one is really a top tier Les Paul. So it's nice. It's what you would expect, right? It meets your expectation that with a $9,000 guitar, you are, getting a top tier Les Paul. And I feel like that's really what I got. Sound wise, playability wise, the checking you just described, generally, like, there are a couple of things we'll talk about in a second, but I think generally speaking, it's a top tier Les Paul.
Yeah, and playability is a good thing. That is another good I want to mention too, because this plays great.
It plays fantastic.
The feeling of it is great. It's got nice frets on it. It doesn't, the fret setup was great out of the box.
Yeah,
you had mentioned.
It was. Yeah.
So as far as that's concerned, it feels like a very good high end Les Paul. It feels like my made to measure.
Right.
Feels like my 54 custom made to measure. This just feels like a great Les Paul, and it sounds like a good Les Paul. So those are both good things. Other things I wanted to mention: rolled fretboard edges here. They really rolled them, and I actually really like that. The Heavy Age Murphy Lab I played did not have nearly as much rolling to it, and this is very comfortable to play. It is a skinnier neck overall, but it's not, like you said, a blade thin neck at all. It feels very comfortable, and I think they really knocked it out of the park as far as that's concerned. I'm a thumb over kind of guy that's always doing that, and it feels very comfortable. So I'll pass it over to you. What are some other good things you want to mention?
I mean, I think good things are generally, I would say, like, the attention to detail is high, right? And we'll talk about a couple of areas in a second where I think maybe that fell short, but I think generally it's very high. So you'll notice, for example, like, one of the things I noticed earlier was, like, the checking in this section right here where your belly would be, or your belt or whatever. Now, there's not, like, buckle rash, but you'll notice there's, like, extra checking in here and here, which would happen because that's where, you're leaning over the guitar or whatever. So I think, like, the attention to detail on that is very, very good. I mean, the attention...
Here too,
on the arm, right? Or like you were talking about the rolled fingerboard edges, right? That's why you see the cream and the white, right? Just like you would see on... I have a Les Paul custom that is very worn like this, and it's the same situation, right? Where it fades like that. So I thought that was very authentic, right? And then I thought even the attention to detail on the tuning pegs, they've got, like, grime and dirt, like, in the tuning posts, which I thought was pretty cool, right? I mean, like, it's the attention to detail, I would say, is generally very high. So I think that for me, that's definitely a good. I think another good thing is the wiring is very cool, right? Like, you've got a bridge master volume, a neck master volume, a master tone, and then this piezo that you can blend in.
Super unique.
Super unique. Like, I'm not aware of any other Les Paul custom that has a Fishman power bridge like this. So I thought that was very cool. And it's even got a stereo jack where you can put the electric side out to your amp and the piezo side straight into the board, right? So I think, like, that sort of stuff is very cool. I think the fretwork is great, right? So like you mentioned a moment ago, the playability is wonderful. The fretwork is great. The frets are smooth. They play great. That's really important. I don't think you realize that until you've had a crappy guitar at one point, or maybe a really old vintage guitar that's starting to degrade, right? And you realize, like, hey, wait a minute, actually, like, the fretwork is highly important, right? So I think they did a very good job with that. So overall, I think attention to detail, very high. Sound is killer. I mean, it's just killer. I mean, you already covered it, I think, ad nauseum, but I mean, plug this into any Friedman, plug it into any Mesa, plug it to any boosted JCM 800 or a Silver Jubilee, and it's killer. Yeah. I mean, it's an absolutely killer hard rock guitar.
Yeah.
So that's the long and short of it.
Totally. Yeah. So I think, overall, it's a very good guitar. It's got, the aging looks great. It plays great. Sounds great. That's what you would expect for a good guitar.
Right.
And
they delivered.
I think it checks those boxes.
They delivered.
Also, I did want to mention too, the weight is good. It's not a boat anchor.
Yeah.
It feels comfortable. I don't know how much it weighs. Have you weighed it?
It's just under 10 pounds. I think it's like 9 pounds, 14 ounces on this one. It does have 9-hole weight relief, which I know was a little bit controversial on some of the forums and things, but there's a ton of recordings that you love that have been made with 9 weight hole relief Les Pauls.
And I'll say the balance is really good on it. It doesn't feel even that heavy, to be honest. It feels like kind of the mid 9s, I would say.
Yeah.
So feels good.
Yeah.
So I think that covers the good overall.
Yep.
So now let's go over to the bad.
Okay, so the bad, and it's hard to say bad about, what is essentially a piece of art, right, effectively. But I would say there's a couple of small things that I didn't love. So, for example, I mentioned that the level of detail was generally pretty high. And notice I used the word generally, right? It was generally pretty high. But there were a couple of bizarre things. And I noticed you mentioned this in your other Murphy Lab video. And I was kind of a little bit disappointed to see that repeated on this guitar as well. So with that, I'm not talking about the finish. I'm talking about things like, the finish is beautifully aged and all this is beautifully aged. And then they made some bizarre choices like putting brand new screws on the pickguards or on the pickup rings, right? Very odd, right? Or one of the things you mentioned in your Murphy Lab video that I also noticed on this one was that the pickup or pickguard little bracket here looks like you said it's been like aged underwater or something, right? And then they've got like a brand new screw, right? Like right into it. So it just seems odd, and I even went and looked at some of my Fender Custom Shop guitars because I was like, hey, maybe this is something I haven't noticed, right, that exists. But like every screw on a Fender Custom Shop guitar, every piece of metal is completely aged the exact same way. So it's a little bit disappointing to see that on this. I think like the Murphy Lab maybe is just like not quite there on that level of detail, right? They're close. But, Ron Thorne and those guys at the Fender Custom Shop are still just like leading the pack, I think, when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The other thing maybe that kind of just came to mind, and again, this is just me personally, right, is I do kind of wish maybe the ebony on the fretboard was a little darker. I know that that's me nitpicking, right? And I am aware of the environmental situation, okay? I know that the 2021 is a different world for ebony and other tone woods than it was back in the day. I mean, right, like God knows, like 10 trees had to be killed to find this dark rosewood or dark ebony fretboard on these old guitars, right? So totally appreciate and understand that. But I guess I just thought like, it's just like, I would call it like, it's kind of borderline black brown, right, is what I would say. And maybe you can't tell on the video, but when you compare it to some of the vintage ones that, had the dark ones, I guess I just feel like for that much money, you would expect to get like really like the creme de la creme, right, of the ebony. And so, and I know Bob Taylor controls the entire ebony market now. We're all just living in his world. But, that's something that maybe I would have expected. And it could darken up a little when I condition it. Gibson, especially recently, is known for sending out guitars with bone dry fretboards. So there is a world in which when I change the strings on this and condition it, it gets darker. But that's just something something small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there anything else you had?
I think that's probably the main bad. The only other thing that I would say is the piezo bridge does seem a little touchy. Like some of these little pickups in here do seem a little bit touchy. Like I had a little bit of problems with like the high E volume not being as high as some of the other strings. I'm going to have that kind of investigated. But, I think we did some research on that, and apparently this is a relatively common issue with these power bridges. So I would love it if somebody fixed that or someone did something. So that's just like a little bit disappointing, but it's not the end of the world, but it's just maybe that's one other thing that you can kind of put in that column.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So I will go over a couple things that I noticed with the guitar.
Yeah.
You covered a lot of the aging, and I think, you hit the nail on the head there. I think Gibson's like very selective on what they're going to age. They knock it out of the park on some sections. They've spent a lot of time aging various pieces of the hardware, and then you see other pieces and it's brand new. So it's perplexing.
It's infuriating to see like all the work that went into aging this pickup, and then they put a brand new screw in it, right? It's like, it's just maddening.
That's a great example. Yeah, I've never seen anyone age the like cover around the wiring on a pickup like they did here. It's very cool. But then you have, again, literally 4 inches away, you've got brand new gold screws around a heavy aged gold cover.
Right.
So it's just odd.
Yeah, it's odd.
That's a great word for it. And the same with the tuning posts, like you showed in the front. It's very aged. On the back, you flip it over and they're nice and shiny.
They're really shiny. Right.
So
it's a little odd. Yeah, it's a little odd.
At least I'll say they aged the strap buttons on this guitar.
They did. Important.
So,
yeah. It's Dunlop strap locks.
They still missed that on the current Murphy Lab production run, but I digress. Overall, I think, like you said, that's a great point. They're going to get better at it. I think they're going to figure it out and start doing it more. I think they have to, honestly. But stuff like that, I just think is kind of unacceptable at this point. We should hold Gibson accountable for that. Fender Custom Shop, like you mentioned, I have 2 Fender Custom Shop guitars, and every piece of hardware is totally aged. It's just, it's so easy,
Yeah.
I feel like. And kind of continue with the hardware. Some of the aging is a little goofy to me. I will say the tailpiece, it's got kind of this very sharp line here in a spot that, like, I feel like you would never really touch in a way that would do that. It just looks a little bizarre to me because it's literally just a patch of gold here, and then it's completely clear of the gold on either side of it. So it just looks strange to me. Now, I will say, I've not seen Jerry's actual Wino guitar. I've not seen a clear picture of it or video of it. So I tried looking genuinely online, and I couldn't. I just couldn't find a picture.
I think that's actually kind of, that maybe is a bad, is like the hype around this was a little bit strange, right? So like the Adam Jones Les Paul, the hype was just crazy through the roof, right? And then I feel like this guitar has been the exact opposite. I mean, we didn't know the specs. There's very few photos of him with this guitar. I think most people associate him with the Degradation Trip white one that's got the torch burns in it. Personally, I would rather have this one. If it was the torch burn one, I probably wouldn't have bought it. It's just not my vibe. I like guitars that are a little more like classy kind of looking. It's just my thing. But yeah, this is kind of a bit of an odd choice. I don't know if that's authentic to his guitar or not, because the hype just hasn't really been there. So it's a little bit strange.
Yeah, so we don't know. It could be. It could be a thing. Maybe I don't know.
If someone knows, put it in the comments. I don't know.
Please do. And the same goes for like some of the little dings and stuff on it. Like, is that on his original? If it is, great. If it's not, it's a little odd, some of them. But yeah, overall, and that's actually a great point as kind of a bad of why this guitar of all the guitars of Jerry's. I think most people, like you said, associate him with, for a Les Paul Custom, they associate that guitar. And the fact that I could not even find a clear photo of him with this guitar. I found like one photo of him playing it live a long time ago, and that was it. Like it's just not like a very obvious guitar of his that's like been out in the forefront. So to have that as like the signature, it's just a little odd.
It's a little odd. I think maybe like if it's a studio guitar, if it's like that kind of situation, I feel like they should have just said so. They should have just been like, hey, this is one of Jerry's #1 studio guitars, right? He's used it on every record since Dirt or something, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, like cool, great, right? But they didn't say anything like that, so like I don't really know. I mean, we also live in a world where the most famous Les Paul in the world is a copy of a Les Paul, right? Which I'm referring to Slash's guitar, right? So I mean, I don't know, right? I don't know, right? But I think, it was a little bit of maybe a strange choice. So
to me, I honestly look at it less as like a signature guitar. Well, I look at it more as like a very cool guitar that's got his name on it, but I don't necessarily directly associate with him playing in a certain song or something. Like
it's not like the November Rain Les Paul or something where you can imagine that in your brain. So I think maybe that has a part of the hype, maybe, because it was like when it was revealed, people were like, okay, I know Jerry, but I don't necessarily know that guitar. So there might be some of that, but I digress. I think I mean, that said, I think it's a cool guitar. I mean, I'm happy with it. It's just
I think it's a killer looking guitar. So continuing on with the bad, a couple other things I wanted to mention. One was the nut on this guitar. So I believe the material is Corian on it.
I think it's Corian.
It's kind of what Gibson uses on, I don't know if they still do, but they used to use it on the standards and kind of...
They still use it on customs. Brand new customs still come with Corian.
And I know all the custom shops used to have that stuff as well. And at some point they moved over to the nylon. And the nylon is just infinitely better in my experience. There's no pinging. They're kind of self-lubricated. They stay in tune better. This guitar is kind of a classic example of a Corian nut, to where it pings a lot when you try and tune it. It won't go up in tuning. All of a sudden it jumps forward. This is a fantastic case for Big Ben's nut sauce to put in there. It works great, and this guitar desperately needs that, to be honest.
I mean, it's kind of a bummer. Like, I was thinking that too, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to take it to my luthier and get them to like do a little bit of smoothing in the nut. And I was like, that's kind of a bummer. With a $9,000 guitar, you would expect that they would get the nut issues figured out, right?
So, and so again, this could be exactly what's on his guitar, and so they made it the same, but I don't know. Personally, I would rather have a nylon nut, even if that wasn't like accurate to his actual one, because they just perform so much better. And And the other thing, I don't know if this was a string issue or maybe the bridge has a little bit of a burr in it or something, but during my playing section, I actually broke a string. I broke the A string here, which I've never done in my entire life. And it broke right here at the bridge, just kind of odd. So I don't know if that was a string issue or a bridge issue, just something to maybe keep an eye on if you have one of these guitars, just to look over the saddles and make sure they're good to go. So I can't necessarily blame the guitar, but just something to keep an eye on because it was a very odd break. I've never seen that happen before.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that kind of covers it overall. The last thing, I'll put that in the in-between category.
Oh, okay.
So we'll move over to the in-between and I'll get right into it.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. Stay tuned for 2 seconds. Okay. So in-between are just kind of things that aren't necessarily good or bad. It kind of depends on your perspective and just the way you look at it, but are kind of things that maybe you personally wish were changed a little bit. And I'll start with the case that the guitar comes in. And so you can see it right here. And so it does have his name on it, but it's just kind of a bog standard black case.
Yeah.
The interior is black. There's nothing special to it.
Yeah.
And then the case candy that came with it, so it has picks with his logo on it. It's got different strap locks.
Yeah.
And that's it.
It's got the COA,
the standard stuff you would get.
Oh, and it does have the plates. It's got a replacement plate for.
And that comes on all custom shop
yeah,
Les Pauls.
yeah.
So it's got kind of the standard stuff, the little booklet saying they checked it, yada yada. But it doesn't have a ton of cool case candy for a guitar that's nearing $10,000. I personally would expect a bit more. I think a cool strap with his logo on it, something of that nature. There's something you had mentioned, I can't remember.
Yeah, I think like the thing I thought about was, Gibson does those like photos of your guitar. Like if you buy a production line guitar, they have like the baby photo or whatever they sent you. I thought it would be cool to get one of those of Jerry signing your guitar. Right, since he hand signed it with a Sharpie, like I think it would have been cool.
It's only 100.
So yeah, just take a photo of him signing it and then be like, "Here's Jerry, literally signing your guitar right now." Like here's the photo, right?
You're just holding it with the showing the
I don't know. It just seemed like that would have been a cool, very easy, and that would have cost Gibson 10 cents per photo. Right? I mean, it would have been very, very cheap, and it would have been very cool. I think maybe related to that, one thing that's on the in between for me is the signature. So the signature is super cool, obviously, right? And hopefully you guys can see it a little bit there.
We'll get close-ups.
We'll get some close-ups. But I kind of think it's a little bit of a bummer that it's just like literally signed on with gold Sharpie. I feel like it would have been cool if they would have maybe like put a coat of lacquer or drip or something over it to like cement it in place, or if they would have, I don't know, done something like that. Okay. Because I mean, like you can see even where his hand smudged it where he signed it. So I'm just like, how long is this signature going to stay on this guitar if it's not sitting in a storage locker somewhere accumulating value, right? Like, where is it? I don't know. So that's kind of a little bit of a bummer that if you want to play it, you're probably going to lose that signature at some point. So I wish they would have done something about that.
Yeah. I guess continuing with that theme, we can go over to the truss rod cover.
Yeah.
Which is another in between for me personally.
Yeah.
It has his name on it, which is, some people like that, some people don't. But the biggest thing for me is it does not have, and I'll show on this guitar, this has kind of, you can see a white outline around the truss rod cover. Yeah. And all Les Paul Customs, to my knowledge, have that. I don't think I've ever seen one that doesn't have that. This does not. So it does have a white underlayer, so it is 2-ply, but it's not, doesn't jut out at all from the black layer. And so you don't really see it. And it looks kind of cheap, to be honest.
It looks a little strange. Yeah.
It just doesn't fit the very cool Les Paul custom headstock, with the diamond inlay and all of that. It doesn't look classy or like extra special like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't understand why they did that. Maybe Jerry requested that. I don't know.
I mean, maybe that's just how his is. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep the guitar yet ultimately, like permanently or not, but I did order a regular Les Paul custom bell truss rod cover because I was like, well, if I do keep it, I'm going to totally replace that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
So little things like that. I'm trying to think if there are any other in-betweens for me.
I think maybe an in-between for me is just a little bit of the inconsistency. I mean, we talked about like the screws and things, but there's just a little bit of inconsistency that's an in-between. You might love it, you might not, right? I don't know. You pointed out that like on the pick guard, they successfully aged like most of it.
Yeah, like
but
80%.
But then there's like some spots like here and here where it doesn't look like they aged it. And actually, if you look on the underside here where it, you guys will have to see on the B-roll, but on this part right here, it's like bone white, right? I mean, it's like straight white. So again, I don't want to bring up like these tiny minutia of the aging process, but I think that kind of stuff is going to be an in-between for people. Personally, I don't care. I generally take the pick guards off my Les Pauls, as you can see. One thing that I thought, and again, this could be an in-between, is just as someone who likes Les Pauls with no pick guard, I love it when the pick guard was never installed. That way you don't have that stupid hole, and there's two of them, I guess, in your guitars, right? So I think it would have been cool if they had given you the option to attach the pick guard, right?
Yeah,
if they had included it and said, like, here it is if you want to put it on, which they used to do, I think, in the mid-2000s with most Les Pauls, right? Les Paul standards and stuff. I think they gave it to you optionally. So I understand this is a tribute guitar or a copy, and Jerry's guitar has it installed, so I understand why it's there. But it would have been cool if they said, hey, you have the option, right? Yeah. In which case I would have been like, yeah, don't install it. So
I will say you're probably in the minority on that.
I think so.
I'm
that's just,
Les Paul pickguard guy. Never take the pickguard off.
We're going to fight in the parking lot after this.
Exactly, yeah. The last thing I think I'll mention is the bridge itself. Now, a Piezo is take it or leave it, right? Yeah. Like you said, you didn't even know it was coming with the Piezo. I think it would have made zero difference to you if it had a Piezo or not when you bought it.
None.
I think probably 99 of the 100 owners probably would feel the same way. They don't really care about it. But I will say it just looks a little out of place on the guitar because it is just a shiny, brand new, off-the-shelf bridge.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't look like they've done anything to it. Again, I can't say what Jerry's looks like because I've never seen it. I feel like nobody's seen a close-up
seen this actual guitar, right? Yeah.
It's like Bigfoot.
Right.
So maybe his looks like that, but to be honest, I doubt it. If he plays the guitar, it's gonna have it's gonna look aged there. Yeah. And it looks like they literally just picked up the pickup from Fishman and plopped it on there. And so it's like the Piezo functionality, neither here nor there for me, but just kind of like it just looks a little out of place on the guitar overall, considering the rest of the aesthetic, the rest of the aging on it. It looks like you put that on,
right?
Versus it came from Gibson,
correct? With
that,
yeah. I think it's a cool option. I just think, and I know Jerry's known for his acoustic tones as much as he's known for his electric tones, right? I mean, Jar of Flies is effectively an acoustic album, right? So I get it, but I feel like I don't know. It's just like I don't feel like I've really seen him play Piezos. I don't feel like it's a thing like you said, I associate with him, right? So it just seems a little bit, I don't know, just a little bit odd. I mean, it's cool that it's there, and maybe I will use it a little bit. But like you said, if it was just regular Les Paul layout, I would have been like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. I think we covered a lot in this video.
Totally.
This is a long video, but there's a lot to cover, and this is such a cool guitar, and the chance to check out a one of 100 guitar, maybe one of 30 in the United States, like you said. It's an awesome opportunity. So thank you so much for bringing this, Mike. And I had a great time playing the guitar. I will say that my stigma against the 498 and 490 combination has been lifted.
He's going to go buy a set right now. He's going to be on Reverb in 10 minutes.
Yeah, another PAF comparison coming to you soon with the 498 and 490.
Well, thank you. Seriously, thank you for the opportunity to make the video and for doing a lot of the work on the video and all that. So seriously, thank you so much.
Well, there's going to be more in the future. He has an amazing collection of not only amps but guitars. He has an unreal collection. So there's going to be more in the future. So definitely stay tuned for that. Subscribe to his channel. Like I said, he's going to be doing some playing with this guitar on that channel that you will not see here. And of course, please subscribe to this channel and stay tuned because there's going to be a lot more coming in the future. All right, guys. See ya.
See ya.